Yeah, well, the speaking, so we went to the whole thing. But I told him what he wanted in Spanish. But we haven't got many Sanskrit scholars now, so they find it difficult to understand to speak regular. Well, we say this time. Oh, yeah. We're hoping there's a master from Sanskrit, but it's not actually a verse, it's prose.
Prose?
Yeah.
Okay, so just recite this with like the prose?
Yeah, there's, yeah. You don't have to keep to a, it doesn't end anywhere, it's not in 4 sections or anything. So.
Well, that makes it easier. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giri Varadari
Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giri Varadari
Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giri Varadari
Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari
Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari
Yashoda
Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giri Varadari
Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giri Varadari
Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giri Varadari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Srimad Prabhupada ki jai, Granth Raj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Jai Gaura Premanandi. Reading from Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita. And this one is entitled, Let There Be a Temple. This is chapter 8 in Australia. Amoga speaking. Prabhupada met Lord Jagannath at City Square by Town Hall. There was a Vyasasa on the cart, but he chose to walk before the carts in front of the deity of Lord Chaitanya. Prabhupada was wearing a gold wool cap, a peach-colored turtleneck jersey, and an effulgent silk saffron dhoti and kurta. Around his shoulder he wore a white silk chador, and he wore a garland of orchards and many yellow flowers. It was winter in Melbourne and quite cold, but he put his hands up and chanted and danced. We had about 11 Ubergangas. There were also 3 men playing big bass drums, and we all formed a circle around Srila Prabhupada. It was ecstatic. ecstatic, all playing drums, chanting Hare Krishna, and Prabhupada himself chanting in a parade going on through the city. Prabhupada marched the transcendental power, just taking over the city, walking right down Swanson Street. Sabhabhati speaking. From the point of view of weather, it wasn't a very nice day. Prabhupada met the Radha cart at the corner of Swanson Street and Burke Street, and he left from there on. He walked about 2 miles. All the devotees had been having kirtan in 3 different groups, but when Prabhupada met the Ratha Yatra procession, we all gathered around him. He was leading the procession. Behind him was a 14-foot Murti of Lord Chaitanya, followed by 3 Radha carts. Every now and again in the procession, Prabhupada would stop and turn around and stare up at Lord Chaitanya. He would simply stand and look up at Lord Chaitanya for a minute or two, and then he would turn around again and lead the procession. It was such an ecstatic experience that one gets the feeling that Prabhupada had conquered Melbourne and Australia. Gaurabhupal. It was right next to Prabhupada through the whole ceremony playing. I was right next to Prabhupada through the whole ceremony playing the drum. He particularly liked to sing one tune through the whole time. He put his hands up in the air. He was dancing. Vaikuntana. The Ratha Yatra parade was going and Prabhupada was walking, and at one point he asked me, "Get me some water." I became panic-stricken because there was nowhere to get water, so I just depended on Krishna and ran over to a house as fast as I could and asked the people for some water. They gave it, and I ran back to Srila Prabhupada. When I was getting that water, though, there was this big rainbow out, and it had actually began to rain a little bit. It was a very vivid rainbow, and at the end of the rainbow came right down on the top of the huge building where the Ratha Yatra ended. Harishori. There is a huge place, the exhibition buildings, and we had rented one section of it where the roof was about 80 feet high. So the Ratha carts were taken in with the tops lowered, and then the tops were put up again inside the hall. All 3 Ratha carts were brought in, and the tops were pulled up. Then Srila Prabhupada came in, and everyone was seated. About 1,000 people were there. Srila Prabhupada sat up on the Vyasasan, on the Ratha cart itself, and gave a lecture from there. Sabhavati. Although it was a cold and rather nasty day, there were 1,000 people in that exhibition building. Prabhupada's lecture was brief. He thanked everyone for coming along and joining in the Sankirtan movement of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He told everyone he was very appreciative of how they had come to see Lord Raghunath and of how they were taking part. He said that actually all these activities of singing and dancing were due to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Grantaraj, Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 1, text number 31. Sorry, 32. Jambu, Laksha, Shamali, Kusha, Kramcha, Shaka, Pushkara, Samgyas, Tesham, Parimanam, Purvasmad, Uttara, Uttaro, Yata, Sankyam, Dvi, Guna, Manina, Bahi, Samantata, Upaklipta, Jambu Plaksha Shalmali, Kushakram Shashaka, Pushkara Sangyas,
Pushkara Sangyas,
Tesham Parimanam Purvasmat,
Tesham Parimanam Purvasmat,
Purvasmat Uttara Uttaro,
Purvasmat Uttara Uttara,
Yata Sakyam Trigunamadhya,
Tasakyam Purvasmat,
Bhagi Samantata Upaklipta.
Visamantata Upavita, Jambu-Laksha Shamali,
Jambu Laksha Shamali,
Kushikaksha Shaka,
Kushakrancha Shaka,
Pushkara Sangyas,
Pushkara Sangyas,
Tesham Parimanam Purvasmat,
Tesham Parimanam Purvasmat,
Purvasmat Uttara Uttara,
Purvasmat Uttara Uttaro,
Yatasakyam Trigunamadina,
Tasagyam Trigunamanina,
Bhagit Samantata Upavita,
Bhagi Samantata Upaklipta, Jambu Laksha Shamali Kusha, Kamcha Shaka Pushkara Sangyas, Tesham Parimanam Purvasmat, Purvasmat Uttara Uttaro, Yata Sankyam Trigunamanina, Bhagi Samantata Upaklipta, Jambu, Jambu, Laksha, Laksha, Shamali, Shamali, Kusha, Kusha, Krauncha, Krauncha, Shaka, Shaka, Pushkara, Pushkara, Samkhya, known as Nisham of them, Parimanam, measurement, Purvasmat, Purvasmat, from the former, Uttara, Uttara, the following, Yata, according to, Sankyam, number, Dviguna, twice as much, Manina, with a measure, Bhagi, outside, Samantata, all around, Upaklipta, produced. Translation of purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. The names of the islands are Jambu, Laksha, Shaumali, Kusha, Krauncha, Shaka, and Pushkara. Each island is twice as large as the one preceding it, and each is surrounded by a liquid substance beyond which is the next island. Report. The ocean in each planetary system has a different type of liquid. How they are situated is explained in the next verse. Kshardikshura soda suroda glitoda kshiroda dadi manduda shuda duda sapta jaladaya sapta dvipa parika iva vyantara dvipa samana eka ekashena yatama purvam saptasvapi bahir dipeshu pritak parita upakalpita stishu jambadishu barhishmati patir anuvrata nat manjan agnitri majiva Yagyabahu Hiranyavito Grita Prishta Vedatiti Vito Trasamgyam Yata Samkye Laikai Kasmin Ikam Ivadi Patim Vidate. Like in the previous ages, they even had a much more developed apparatus of vocal to recite this kind of prose that they wrote. So this is translation. The seven oceans respectively contain salt water, sugarcane juice, liquor, clarified butter, milk, emulsified yogurt, and sweet drinking water. All the islands are completely surrounded by these oceans, and each ocean is equal in breadth to the island it surrounds. Maharaj Priyavrat, the husband of Queen Barhishmati, gave sovereignty over these islands to his respective sons, namely Agnitra, Idmajiva, Yagyabahu, Hiranyareta, Dhritarashtra, Medatiti, and Vitihotra. Thus they all became kings by the order of their father. Purport. It is to be understood that all the dvibas or islands are surrounded by different types of oceans, and it is said herein that the breadth of each ocean is the same as that of the island it surrounds. The length of the oceans, however, cannot equal the length of the islands. According to Viraragavacharya, the breadth of the first island is 100,000 yojanas. One yojana equals 8 miles, and therefore the breadth of the first island is calculated to be 800,000 miles. The water surrounding it must have the same breadth, but its length must be different. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnanjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapanantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapadakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahamana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvitam Savadutam Parijana Sagitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahavrana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagapati Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Nahami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Mukam karoti vachalam pangum nandrite girim nirvipadam nande Shri Guru Dinatani. The diverse spiritual master of blind man can see the stars, the lame man can cross the mountains, and dumb man can speak eloquently. I therefore offer my respectful obeisances unto the lotus feet of my spiritual master. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna 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 Vishnu Padaya Krishna Krishna Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pachari Namaste Shunavadi Pashati Deshvatani. Translation. The names of the islands are Jambu, Plaksha, Shamali, Kusha, Kramcha, Shaka, and Pushkar. Each island is twice as large as the one preceding it, and each is surrounded by a liquid substance beyond which is the next island. So this is earthly plane described, as we discussed last time, according to different levels of consciousness, whether one is influenced by a lower mode of ignorance or passion or goodness or various types of mixtures of these. There are different places in the universe to match that kind of consciousness and desire of living entity according to qualification of past activities and desire. One can take birth in different types of places. So here what we are analyzing is earthly plane, Jambu Dweep, which is like a middle planetary systems, which are actually very significant places. And it's like this planet, from here you can go up or you can go down, you can degrade your consciousness or you can uplift your consciousness. So this is a very significant place from where you either stay here if your desires remain very passionate in terms of economic development, in terms of various types of influences of the passion that manifest in terms of aiming for wealth, fame, and knowledge in a passionate way that you want to get something out of it, but it's not necessarily so degraded yet. In the lower planetary systems, there is so much more suffering, and in the higher planetary systems, there is so much more enjoyment. But this significance and advantage, and to be in this middle plane, that there are like an equal degrees of happiness and distress. Because when distress is very, very extreme, then if it's for a short period of time, then it can act as an impetus to do something about it. And some people come to spiritual life due to this distress. But when the stress is too high, is the mind is very, very disturbed, and one can get very desensitized as well. The struggle is so hard that it's very difficult then to take to spiritual life. It's like a no escape. You have to struggle so hard, and even in this earthly planes, we see that sometimes people are kind of caught up in such an intense kind of struggle for existence and misery that there is no space, no scope for them to explore the idea of spiritual life. They're so caught up, or they're so kind of suffering or miserable or even depressed. You can see that as you spoke, this suffering can be a jumping ground, but sometimes people get in such a bad depression that they can't get completely out of the bed, or they just can't just do anything. They become so dysfunctional that they just don't do absolutely anything to try to fix their problem or misery or whatever the case may be. Just kind of going on a medicine and just not doing anything and trying to cover misery with some effect of medicine, whatever medicine they may be. So it is very difficult when it's too much struggle, too much misery, unless somebody kind of comes and pushes you and gives you some sort of instruction, guidance, inspiration, or you kind of fall out of the bed, and then you decide, okay, I have to do something about it. Like there was this one, one of those so-called inspirational videos, and this one person was very, very depressed and unhappy, and just was sitting in a bed and watching TV, like a day after day, month after month. I don't know whether it reached a year or two, and just like gaining weight, watching TV, and that's that. Somehow never had some money to do that, because it was like I think like a star, like a film star or something. And then this lady, then she was watching this one film, not one film, it was a launch of spaceship. And it was like a countdown, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And it's with so much energy, when the spaceship is lifting, that's the most difficult time in terms of how much energy is being used, and so much fire and so much fuel is coming out, and smoke, this lifting of the ground, the spaceship. It's really, really a lot of effort. And then when it's kind of lifted, then there's much less fuel. And the same like with the plane as well. The plane is rising, and the lifting of the ground, it uses a lot of energy, but when it reaches like a plateau, then it kind of flies and uses much less energy. So this lady, she just realized, I have to rise, she did a countdown herself, from 10 to 0, and then she got out of her bed, and that kind of lifted her out. And so it requires a lot of energy if you're into that condition of influence or mode of ignorance, to get out of it requires a lot of struggle, a lot of energy, and even support from others. It's not a very favorable mode to get in. And if you are in a planetary system where that mode is predominant, it's just so gloomy and so dark, and such a struggle is practically spiritual life is very, very hard. Because it's difficult, also you don't have a desire to do much as well. Either you're like a very angry or harsh or something, so there is those very hard interactions, or you just don't want to do anything at all. And if you do have some interaction, then it's like very miserable. So you don't want to stay there. And then in the heavenly planets, there is so much enjoyment and happiness. And if you look in our life as well, maybe before becoming devotee, when things are like just totally jolly, happy, especially when you like going through some teenage years or before that, when there is no problem, there is nothing to worry about, and it's just everything is just easy peasy. Your parents give you what you need, to some extent anyway, and then it's like no problem. You are not interested in anything except having some fun and playing. And you can see at kids as well. They just want to play. They have no problem. They're just running around and having a great time. There is no like existential thoughts at that time. You are not bothered about any existential thoughts to try to find something higher. And then everything is fantastic. So you can see some people like who are got a good karma, and they're going through the patch of good karma. They're just not interested so much into spiritual journey or finding something deeper in life. So that's the situation with lower and these higher planets is not so favorable for spiritual practice. So this earthly plane again is such a good opportunity for us to be in, that it is an equal amount of suffering, approximately, an equal amount of enjoyment. So it's a good balance. So that misery, it pushes you out of comfort zone, that this is not really a place to be and find the ultimate happiness. No matter how great you are, even those great in terms of people who are famous, rich, etc., they also go through struggles. And now, quite a few of them, they even opened up saying, to be honest, it's not such a great life as I expected. It's a struggle. You don't know who's your friend. Are the people around you? Are they because of money, or they just because they're true friends? So it's quite hard in that way. Or they tend to become arrogant as well, and you end up to be, even if you have friends, those friends leave you. You just become surrounded by people who just because of money they tolerate your arrogance. You just tolerate your arrogance, and because you have money, they can gain something from you. So it's quite there is no really such a great situation in this material world, specifically in the earthly planetary systems. So it kind of pushes us. It pushes us towards spiritual life as a great opportunity, because of this misery, and the happiness is not so great. The sensual thrills are quite limited. And in fact, misery is higher than happiness. Generally speaking, especially in this age of Kali, which is, people are like whoever is born in this age, there is quite a good quite a high amount of misery that are hanging above their heads in terms of karma. And so you can see that, here in this specific earthly plane where we are now, all the oceans are salt from salt water, so that is even more favorable. Because there are in a Jambudvip, as we can read here, there are even places where there are different types of oceans, like a sugarcane juice, liquor, clarified butter, milk, yogurt, and sweet drinking water. So it may seem a little bit like inconceivable, even or difficult to believe that there is waters like this. But as we discussed before, people have to reap a certain uh, you know, their karma, and there is even within earthly plane there is different types of levels, and we can see some of those places are a little bit more like you can say like here we have a salty water, but other places has got a little bit nicer situation there. So there is a little kind of variety there in terms of what you can experience. And sometimes the desires of living entity as well can be very interesting. You know, like sometimes you may be taking, like we had a feast for a destiny. I don't know anybody had an experience like this, but the mind is so interesting that it can even have the desire. You may be taking a sweet rice, and your mind may be thinking, I would like to swim in an ocean of sweet rice. Sometimes the mind is so tricky. You can have this kind of desires or thoughts, or some people like we were discussing this between one person who is in Glasgow. He runs like a restaurant, and it's quite quiet actually. The restaurant is in a city center, is far away from residential areas. Apparently, the restaurants in non-residential areas are doing a bit better. Anyway, the lockdown is finished, so there's a bit more people, but not so many people in that area where his restaurant is running. So he says his place is empty, but the next door there is a pub, and the streets are practically empty still, because a lot of offices in that area is like an office place. There's lots of offices, and people are still working from home, so there's barely anybody on the street. However, in the pub is totally jam-packed, in spite of the social distancing, etc. The pub is absolutely jam-packed. And technically speaking, in terms of consciousness of the person, people more or less are swimming there in the ocean of beer, or whatever the case may be, like a liquor, beer, and that kind of thing. This is what they very much focused and attracted, is to swim in the ocean of beer. They're not bothered to so much handle or this is how they're handling the miseries of material existence, by destroying their consciousness. They don't want to be in that conscious state, so they prefer to bring it down, so that the miseries they forgot, living in a state of some sort of forgetfulness. So instead of lying in a bed, as we mentioned, there's another way of mode of ignorance, is to obliterate and destroy your consciousness by getting it intoxicated. So then, as we read, there is some earthly plane where there is an ocean of liquor, etc. So that's the situation where you may not be so extremely sinful to just to go down to the lower planets, but you may be buried in that situation where there is an ocean of liquor, and then etc. So there are different realms, and in order to develop this faith in Shastra, there is some necessity, significant to develop this understanding that there is so much things that we don't see, or we can't see and perceive with our eyes. As we read in Bhagavad Gita, there are 8 types of material energy. There's a gross matter in terms of earth, water, fire, ether, air, elements. So just in this earthly plane, it's very prominent. Earth and water elements are very, very prominent, and ether and air, and fire is less prominent. However, there are different types of realms that ether and air is more prominent. Ethereal bodies, air bodies, or fire. Those elements is just a different percentage that living entities have those bodies with the different types of percentage of combinations of those elements, and a part of that there is also mind and intelligence and ego. So and some people even focus, they read Bhagavatam as well about various beings who got ethereal bodies, angelic beings, etc., which actually will be reading quite a lot about these various different things in the specific fifth canto. I mean, there are different types of bodies, and some people can perceive as well, like people who's got like ghostly bodies and that kind of thing. Some people can perceive them, and not necessarily that all of them are like are like got bad karma or they committed suicide or whatever. That they don't have a body to enjoy, made out of those gross senses and gross elements. But some of them is got just like a little type, some sort of a more heavenly type of beings. So there are so many things that we cannot perceive, and some new age type of groups and people, they just totally focus on those beings, like connecting with them, interacting with them, doing all sorts of healing, and some of things are innocent, and some things are not so innocent. So it's just having that understanding that there's so much more than we can see just with our physical eyes, even in this material world, what to speak about spiritual realm, what to speak on other planetary systems, etc. But even in this material world, I mean specifically in this earthly planet that we're living on, there are so much things that we don't perceive or don't understand fully, and even the science that has been very, very rejecting all those things for a number of years due to the meditation and various types of similar practices. They're opening up to the psychic phenomena, and also neuroscience is testing the brain. It has become more scientific. The psychological phenomena was considered irrational, but since now we can measure the effect of the brain and how it functions through using neuroscience methodology, you can test how your brain changes. There's much more people are opening up to idea, and that various types of influences in terms of sound, in terms of breathing, in terms of environment, can have this different effect on your brain. And also in quantum mechanics, they also observe that if you observe matter, if there is a conscious observer of matter, and if there isn't conscious observer of matter, the matter acts in a different way. It manifests completely different properties. So it shows how the consciousness is influencing matter and having effect on matter. And this is they just scratching a little bit of surface, information, just using their senses that are limited, and also as human beings, and also born in this Kali Yuga, we have a very limited piety as well to experience more subtle phenomena. the problem in the age of Kali, like we read so many wonderful things in Srimad Bhagavatam, but in the age of Kali, we don't have a piety, and the scientists and all the very intelligent people materially, they don't have a piety to experience a more subtle phenomenon, no matter how scientific you are, and how intelligent you are, and how you may have like scientific instruments, um, because the piety is lacking. This Kali Yuga is limiting us of what we can actually perceive in a more subtle elements. And we can see, some scientists even say that mind doesn't exist. It's just some sort of, yeah, they kind of rationalized everything so much, to the extent that sometimes even a child can perceive that a mind is there, and mind has a thoughts, and feelings are there, etc. But everything has been rationalized to the chemical reactions. So that means, people may be writing scientific books, but there's a different levels of consciousness of what you actually can perceive with your level of, with your level of consciousness, you can perceive a different degree of things. Just like, if you're influenced by anger, if you have like a very angry day, and then your perception is completely different. What people are saying to you, you're gonna react in a totally different way if you're angry or frustrated. Um, or if you are, like a very jolly, something happens in your life, even something bad. If you're in a good shape mentally, then you're gonna perceive the same thing in a different way. So different levels of modes of nature as well. Um, you can perceive the same phenomena in a different way. So elevated consciousness, purified consciousness, mode of goodness, you can perceive so much more, things. Also, when you're depressed and everything is gloomy and dark and etc., you just can't see anything around you except of your misery, except of your, bad day or your frustration, or or you're trying to cover with intoxication, etc. So your perception becomes so limited. Or if you are very greedy, then you're gonna see everything around you, and like whatever you're gonna get out of it materially. Or if you're very lusty, then you see objects around you, just basically just to satisfy your lust. So you can see that through our consciousness, we can perceive things in a different way. So now, how we can judge in our limited consciousness. We have some humility of the things that we can see now with those limited senses that are still influenced by various types of modes. Even if you're practicing devotional service, and we read about these amazing things that is happening in the universe, but how much we can perceive with our limited senses, and even before becoming a devotee, what we can experience, what we could experience at that time, and what we can experience now. Like Krishna was completely outside of the ability of us perceiving him, when, especially if you are coming from atheistic background, then how much we could perceive at that time, just like completely absorbed in our senses, bodily existence of life. But when we starting to practice Krishna consciousness, chanting, we start to experience this, the things beyond our senses in terms of Krishna, being present in the form of kirtan, in the form of holy name, in a scripture, in the form of some instruction from spiritual master, various types of almost mystical, magical things we start to perceive, or something happens in our life, instead of seeing as just some sort of miserable thing just happened to me, or happy thing, then we start to see, oh my God, this is Krishna making an arrangement. He's giving me this token action for me to learn something, how this beautiful thing has happened, and I am so grateful to Krishna because it happened to me. So you can see, and this is just the beginning of what we can perceive. And if you become very purified, elevated, uplifted consciousness, how much more things we can perceive. Premanjila Churita Bhakti Vilochanina Santa Sadaiva Hridaya Shivalikoyanti is a description by Brahma of most elevated consciousness when our eyes are tinged with the salve of love, and then we can see Krishna everywhere. So then again, various types of sages or just like a different types of beings with a more type of subtle karma and subtle existence, etc. There is, they're able to perceive a different type of realms, and there are different type of realms are there to facilitate, even some unusual desires of living entity. So we shouldn't doubt when these things are there in the scripture, which we're gonna be going through. We have to open up for these things that are not so conceivable currently for us due to limitation of our senses. And this is fifth canto is very important for us to open up our mind and understand and be open to limitations of our current perception and open up to those things because it's coming from pure devotees in the form of Shastra and the transcendental sound vibration, and just being able to, even theoretically to accept it and just be able to handle it and have this leap of faith, like the spaceship as well, rising to higher levels. Our faith as well can rise us to higher levels. That I'm developing this pure faith in a pure Vaishnavas, and I can at least theoretically accept until that realization will manifest and until I be able to perceive these things more in my life. I can accept it, and that faith, of spaceship of faith can take us to higher levels of our Krishna consciousness. So are there any questions or comments on this?
That person, to one hand who has implicit faith in the spiritual master and
In Krishna.
And Krishna all the reports of the Vedas and
Yes. Yes, and also we can project as well faith, like in the beginning we are kind of experimenting a little bit with Krishna consciousness, and then we get a certain type of result. You can even apply scientific methodology to gain faith in Krishna consciousness. In the beginning we're just exploring, we're trying things out, and if we apply it properly, we start getting a result in terms of purification, in terms of freedom from some desires, in terms of realization, in terms of experiencing Krishna, etc. So because we developed more and more faith, then the things that look inconceivable, that we also have to apply this principle of inconceivability. Okay, this is inconceivable. In order to have a full faith, we need to accept that certain things will be inconceivable beyond our limited ability to perceive and understand and conceive. So when we add those things up, because I have this personal experience and realization of a certain aspects of philosophy, the other things that I cannot experiment, because the things that I could experiment is working, then I can also have a full faith in the things that I cannot necessarily experiment and try it out, when we read other parts of the Shastra. But because I having direct, practical, real experience by doing other things that I can try in my life, then I can, as my faith grows, I can project that faith to other things that are beyond my experience before, and beyond the experiment. And so, and if we have that spirit, actually, this is the very thing, as Mataji brought out this point, that by having that implicit faith in the spiritual master and Krishna, then we are able to get those realizations. And it is described in Bhagavad Gita that it's not just theoretical understanding, actually we can realize it. Just like Shukadeva Goswami was described that he heard it from Vyasadeva and he was able to realize that knowledge at the same time. So that knowledge is revealed in the form of realization, but it's not in a descending way. It's not in a way that we just experiment it, but it's also, it descends that knowledge by mercy of Krishna and reveals that understanding to us. So stop here. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Nitai Gaura Premanande.
Krishna Krishna Hare Rama.